Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to talk to you about this because what I was saying during my intro was that this film is a feel-good film, which sometimes people give kind of short shrift to. But you have two of the world's leading actresses that ever existed in this film. And what's wrong? What's wrong if you walk away from a film feeling good?
I don't know. Don't you think people seem to want something to complain about, whatever it is? How dare you make me feel good?
I know, right?
How dare you make me cry? How dare you make me laugh? No,
don't
people
make
need
me
to
feel
complain
anything.
about something, yeah.
So this is adapted from a novella of the same name from the late 1950s. How and you co-adapted this into the screenplay. How did you come across the source material, and what was it about it that made you want to make it and leave it in this time period?
Lots of good questions in that one question, actually. First of all, I have been a lifelong Paul Gallico fan, so my introduction to him was through a children's book called Jenny, and I read many of his books, but I missed the Mrs. Harris series. When I signed with a manager in LA, he also, it happens, managed the Paul Gallico estate. And so he's the one who first alerted me to this title, and I read it and I had an immediate response to it on a couple of levels. First of all, the character is just so delightful and irresistible, and you can't but fall in love with her and want to tell her story. And I have a bit of a thing for underdogs as well, so she certainly fitted that mold. But secondly, my father moved to Paris when I was 7 years old, so I've spent quite a bit of my life between London and Paris, and I felt that I could really do justice to both worlds, and that was a very important aspect of making the film. There was another question in your question there that I wanted to answer. Trying to think what it was.
Why did you want to keep it in this time period?
That's what it was, yeah. I thought about updating it and maybe having it about a Filipino maid or something like that, which would make sense, and there's a validity to that. But the world of fashion is completely different now to what it was in the 1950s. First of all, it's ubiquitous. The idea that you would have to travel to another country to buy a dress is impossible, absurd, not necessary. And secondly, Dior, which is such an important character in the film, the House of Dior, was truly king in the 1950s in a way that it never has been again. And right now, we could probably name 5, 10 brands that are the big fashion brands, but there isn't any one amongst them where you can say this is the brand. Whereas it was absolutely the case in the 50s that Dior was the brand. And so that was, I think, very important as well. But yeah, too many things about the ubiquity of fashion and the specialness, the uniqueness of couture at that time, I think, is why it had to be kept to that period, as well as the class differences and the importance of class. Many, many aspects of the story. You know, for example, I was under increasing pressure at various times to cast a younger, more attractive Mrs. Harris, because that's thought to be more commercial. But the story would have been utterly spoiled if it wasn't about a woman at that stage in her life. So there are many reasons why I think one had to respect the original time and age of the character.
So yeah, let's talk about your actors. What made you go with these two like incredible powerhouses who, when I watch this, they make it look so easy. They're so magnificent. They just bring all of themselves to everything that they do.
Yes, and they have extremely different energies and very different approaches to how they go about their work, which was really fascinating. And as a director, you're always having to adjust what you do to the individual talent. So this was actually a very, very difficult role to cast because it's a leading role, but it requires a character actor. And there are very, very few character actors who can actually carry a movie, let alone raise the finance for a movie. So to find somebody who had those qualities is really only a handful. And I'd always had my eye on Leslie because I thought she was very right for this part. And when she was nominated for an Oscar for Phantom Thread, I thought, right, well, now's my chance. But even then, I was told that it would be difficult to finance it with her name alone. She has never actually been the sole star of a film before. So, well, since then she made that. Well, no, she did Ordinary Love with Liam Neeson, but I mean that was the combination of the two. So for it to be her as the person carrying it, it's her first time really. And so very luckily for me, early on in the process, I had a producer called Philippe Carcassonne who produced Coco Before Chanel and more recently The Father. And he has a long-standing relationship with Isabel, and he was
6 degrees of separation.
Absolutely.
You utilized it.
It's who you know. Everybody knows that about this business. So he spoke to her first of all, and she said, you know, I like the script. It's very charming, but I need to meet the director, and I need to find out who's playing Mrs. Harris. So Leslie hadn't been cast at that point. And I met with Isabel, and of course, we got along very well, and we clicked straight away. And when we cast Leslie, that was the kind of final yes, if you like, because Paul Thomas Anderson is a huge auteur director, very revered and respected in France, and of course, Isabel had massive respect for Leslie's work in Phantom Thread.
Leslie is known for playing. It's so interesting that you cast her in this because I mean I saw her in LA a few years ago here in Long Day's Journey and Tonight, which is one of the most difficult roles for women in the American theater. Is that role, and I was awestruck. So if you ever get the chance to see Leslie Manville on stage, it's really special. I don't know if I would have thought of her for this, but as soon as it came up and I was like, she's perfect for this.
Did you ever see Mum, the series, the BBC series?
I don't think so, no.
Anyone seen it? Yeah. So it's a really fabulous series. You should try and get your hands on it. And she plays this very quiet, slightly put upon, working class-ish matriarch who's lost her husband. And there are some parallels to Mrs. Harris, but she's a very, very kind character. Mrs. Harris has a lot more get up and go about her, and she grows in stature and confidence. With Mum, you never see her get angry, you never see her rail against the appallingness of her family. But there was enough in that character combined with the astonishing performance in Phantom that I just knew that she was going to be extraordinary for this.
Did you go back and look at any of her Mike Leigh movies when you were deciding?
Absolutely. I mean, I first noticed her in Another Year because that was an extraordinary performance as well. Alan Rickman was a dear friend of mine, and they had worked together. She was in the original Dangerous Liaisons on stage with him.
Oh wow.
Playing the Uma Thurman character. There's an irony there, which I won't go into now. So he was also very much in favor, and his widow, in fact, is the one who said to Leslie, "Look, this director's interested in you for this part. You should take it seriously. It's really going to be a good thing for you." So he became a sort of absent fairy godfather, if you like, to the project.
I also loved everybody that you had that's in her world. You know, in her world in England, her friend Vi. Can you talk about finding a person to play her best friend Vi?
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the things I wanted to do. So even though I set it in its period, I wanted it to feel a little bit fresher and more contemporary. And the character as written is just a Cockney cleaner like Ada. I think there was a danger if everyone in her world was like her, of it being a bit, maybe a bit dull, a bit cozy. So we took advantage of the fact that in the 50s there was a big migration from Jamaica to the UK, people seeking employment and a better life. They're called the Windrush generation, named after the boat that brought them over. And so there was a great opportunity to cast a Jamaican actress as the best friend, historically accurate, but feeling more contemporary as an idea. And Ellen is just the most joyful, beautiful human being. And they have such a natural, they had a great natural affinity. You felt their friendship so strongly. Straight away, and they're so different, and I just love those contrasts. And then Archie, who again could have been a Cockney, was Irish, so that was a different flavour again. And then we had the Jamaican bus conductor, who comes back at the very end as a possible love interest for Vi. So we were able to make the world of Mrs. Harris a bit more diverse and a bit more interesting.
I have a trivia question for you. I forgot I wrote this down. Paul Gallico has had, I'm sure several, but another very famous screenwriter adapt him into a film. Do you know who that was?
Are you talking about the Poseidon Adventure?
No, this is Pride of the Yankees. Do you know what screenwriter co-adapted? This was new to me. I didn't realize.
I mean, I just have this weird feeling, Gore Vidal or somebody like
it's
that.
It's Herman Mankiewicz.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea Herman Mankiewicz co-wrote Amazing. Pride of the Yankees.
No idea.
Also known as the Lou Gehrig story.
Okay, I'm not a baseball guy.
But you're in good company.
I have to admit.
As for people who have adapted,
I will know that now.
Paul Gallico scripts.
Yeah. It's a good trivia quiz.
Herman Mankiewicz.
Yeah.
Also wrote Citizen Kane, just for reference. So, did you talk? Can you talk about the look of the film? Because sometimes, I was watching it and I was like, this feels like it came out of I'm looking at something that came out of a magazine from this time period. Was that something purposeful that you decided to do with your designers and your DP?
So, the look of the film had to achieve a few different things. First of all, very clearly differentiate between the two worlds. So I wanted London to feel very different from Paris. And we did that through, primarily through a choice of color palette. So London was mostly grays and greens and browns and soft colors like that, and fog, etc. And Paris was sharper, more defined, so it was black and white and more primary and more punchy colors, and we accentuated that with the grading as well to create these two different worlds. I also hired one of my dear friends and one of the most incredible production designers that's ever lived, Luciana Righi, to do the production design. Because like me, she has lived in London and Paris, and so she really understood those two worlds. And that was particularly important because we shot the majority of the film in Budapest for budget reasons. And also, as it weirdly turned out, it had the lowest COVID rates in Europe at the time. So we were able to get on with it when many, many productions were stuck. And so, given that we were in Budapest, I needed a production designer who knew what Paris, a doorknob or an English window looked like, because we weren't going to find that in Budapest. We had to define it. And in terms of the period feeling, I discussed with the DP the idea that I wanted it to look a little bit like a black and white film that had been colorized. So that was what I was going for. And so we did experiment with starting with black and white and then adding color bit by bit, the way you would in a colorizing process. But the other big decision was, after doing camera tests, it was very, very clear to me that the anamorphic lenses, which were made by Cooke in the 1950s, which had now been modernized, created a magical feeling by slightly distorting the edge of the frame and also changing what would have been a round light into a slightly oblong light. And I know that sounds weirdly particular, but it adds to the sense that you're not in the real world. You are in some kind of magical
That's amazing.
world.
That specificity.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was super important because the film is an absolute tightrope between reality and magic. And if you go too far into the magic, you lose your grip on reality. And if you go too far into the reality, you lose the magic. So it really was such a careful balancing act between those two things.
That's the thing that I loved about this film is, despite its being set in the late 50s, it was so easy for me as an audience member to put myself to be in her shoes, because we all do imagine, like, what if I got some money? What would I do with it? You know what I mean? Not like lottery winner money, where you like change your life, but something that you could just splurge and have a good time with.
Yeah, I really think that's one of the absolutely universal aspects of the film, because I doubt there's a single person here who hasn't aspired to something that seems unattainable or saved for something that was really beautiful or precious or special, and it doesn't have to be an item of clothing.
So I love the actual Dior show that she goes to. Were those real time period Dior dresses?
Yes, so I talked about the magic and realism. So one of the feet that the film dips into is the real House of Dior. And so I wanted to recreate it as truthfully and accurately as possible. So we had the architectural drawings from Dior in order to recreate the House of Dior, the interior, exactly as it was. And we also replicated the dresses, because in my initial conversation with Jenny Bevan, the costume designer, I said, I want you to out Dior. I want you to, be inspired by him and create something even more fantastical. And she said, you're absolutely mad. You cannot improve on Dior. So what ended up happening was very interesting. All of the dresses, except for the 3 invented dresses from the book, namely Ravissante, the first dress that she sees in Lady Dance's bedroom, the green dress, Venus, and Temptation, which is the red dress that she wants. Those 3 dresses are the book dresses, and they were all what I call Bevan Dior. So they were all enhanced ideas inspired by Dior designs. Every other dress that you see is an exact replica of Dior, including 5 dresses that actually came from the House of Dior that they had made themselves, and that they're the initial dresses that you see in the show. So the further you go into the show, the more Jenny Bevan replicas and then inspired by dresses you get. But it's very, very
That
accurate.
sequence is fabulous. Leslie Manville's clothes in it are gorgeous. Everybody looks so fantastic in it. It's so funny because I'm not a big fashion person who like keeps up with modern couture, but I'm obsessed with fashion documentaries. And this was like watching a fashion documentary. It was just like the opportunity to see gorgeous clothes on amazing people.
Yeah, we studied those YouTube documentaries about the fashion shows and how the models walked and the circuit that they made from their dressing room into the salon, out in front of the staircase where the journalists were sitting, and then back to their, either back through the room or straight back to, if they had a quick change to make, back to the dressing room. And we ran the show as if it were a real show. And so we determined the sequence, and the sequence was based on day wear and then cocktail dresses and then evening wear, ball gowns, and finally the wedding dress, which was the traditional ending of a show. So Christian Dior today, with their archivists and their historians and their immense pride in their heritage, have huge admiration and pride for the film because it was extremely respectful, indeed a love letter to the House of Dior.
So I watched an interview with Leslie Manville today, and she had some really nice things to say about you, so you should check it out. It's on YouTube.
Yes, please.
She loved working with you.
Oh, thank you.
But she also, the interviewer asked her what she hoped people would take away from this film, what she hoped they would feel. And she said joy. What is it you hope that people will take away from the film?
There are a couple of things, I think, for me. One is a really central theme of my life, which is to never give up on your dreams. I don't think you can have a filmmaker in the world who isn't completely dogged and persistent, because it's a very hard job to do, and you are often discouraged and think that you're never going to get there. And of course, if you do bail, you're not going to get there. So persistence and never giving up on your dreams is very important for me, and I think for everyone. And I feel for people who don't have the courage to continue to pursue what they desire and what they dream of. So that's one message. But also, I think central to the film and what attracted me to the character is I think the whole notion of karma is very central to the film, and the idea that if you treat people with kindness, you will receive kindness back. If you behave badly, like Lady Dan does, eventually you will get your comeuppance and you will be punished. And that may be a bit Pollyanna-ish and idealistic of me, but I think there's enough truth in it that I'm sticking to that. And ultimately, I also want people to feel uplifted, because we're going through a very rough period in the world right now, between climate change and war and economic crisis. And if people can have a couple of hours respite from that and come out of the cinema feeling really great, joyful, that's a wonderful thing.
Did you feel great and joyful at the end? I did too. Thank you so much for coming. It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Will we have any questions from the audience, or we don't do that?
We don't usually know.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.